it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Part 1. I crouched down and shone my torch into the victim's wounds. Large amounts of her hair strands were found around the body in the bed, suggesting the victim's hair had been pulled violently. Most likely that she was sexually assaulted. Her hands and feet were tied together as she laid in what we call the hog roast position. The only thing missing was an apple in her mouth. The forensic investigator who freelances as a photographer took a Polaroid of each notable finding as I was around the room. The next thing I noticed was the blood seeping from Mrs. DeVille's ear, most likely from an internal skull fracture. She had a nasty bump and cut on the back of her head, and this was likely how the killer had kept her sedated. Mrs. DeVille had suffered a serious sexual assault, pre- and post-mortem. The left top bedpost had been snapped off and used to sodomize her. This occurred post-mortem and likely was just to cause a shock when the bodies were found. The cause of death was a stab wound to the neck, just under the ear. She, just like all the other victims, had chunks of flesh torn from her back, breast, and neck, and they'd been removed with teeth. And these occurred after the victim was dead. Mrs. DeVille's husband, Nate, and their 2 children, Ryan and Sasha, were all found bound and gagged with duct tape. They all died of a single knife wound to their throats, sat up against the wall of the master bedroom. The medical examiner clocked their deaths around the same time or slightly after Mrs. DeVille's. Whoever had killed this family had lined them up in the bedroom so they could watch their mother and wife being raped and murdered. My name is Special Agent Peter Quince. The other agents call me Quincy. I've been called into the homicide after this home invasion murder in Lincoln, Nebraska had been the third in a suspected link between 2 other similar mass homicides. The others being the Scott family in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and the Claytons in Austin, Texas. All the murders took place over the course of the last 6 months and were suspected to be by the same person. A man the newspapers were dubbing the Showtime Killer, or STK. According to the crime scene walkthrough expert, in each case the killer broke into the home during the night through an open window. He'd enter the kids' room first, easily subduing the younger and weaker tenants. Then, from what we can tell, he lures the husband out of the room with a noise or a light. He ambushes the husband, subduing him as well. Then, finally, he assaults the female, who are clearly the main targets, with some sort of blunt instrument. He proceeds to line up the husband and kids in a line facing the bed, while he does his thing with his main victim. Once done, he kills the whole family and flees into the night. The Bureau was assigned in on this case to assist Austin, OC, and Lincoln PDs to help create a profile for the killer and brief the local law enforcers, just in case this sicko was still in each of the areas, potentially plotting more victims. Well, it wasn't long ago I'd worked on a similar case, under the wing of a longtime friend, Special Agent James Rodriguez, who was Deputy Team Leader in Behavior Sciences. Together we helped build a profile for a serial killer known as the Crossline Cannibal. This profile, along with a police sketch, was broadcast to the world at every opportunity over the course of around a year. Eventually, the correct pair of eyes saw it. The killer's wife. She reported him to the Bureau, and it turns out the killer was a man named Robert Cassidy. Cassidy's wife, Amy Edmonds, knowing her husband's ways and our advice on sociopathic behavior, managed to outsmart him and get a confession on tape. Cassidy was arrested and taken into custody with Dallas PD, as San Antonio didn't have space in their county jail. Here, it was reported by Cassidy that he was violently assaulted in a holding cell by 2 officers. Well, the officers denied it, saying Cassidy had the wounds when he came into custody. Cassidy, who acted as his own attorney during his defense, then tried to use this at his trial in a way of creating reasonable doubt with the jury, saying the confession was made under duress, as he was beaten into saying it. Well, the confession was almost thrown out, if not for one of the officers owning up to the beating with his colleague. The officers were both disciplined and charged with perverting the course of justice, but they were let off with a caution. The officer who came forward was able to save his job, And to this day, I believe he still works there. If memory serves me correctly, his name was Officer Mills. When the confession was entered into evidence, Cassidy approached the prosecution and offered to trade his death for his life. Well, in return, he would give the location of a burial site in Atlanta where police would find a number of missing persons. 10 victims were found at this site, back from when Cassidy was younger and first developed a taste for murder. In the hole, they found bones and ashes of what turned out to be an old girlfriend, the boy she cheated on Cassidy with, as well as, more significantly, a boarding school teacher and a local drug dealer. The others were prostitutes on the missing persons list. Cassidy was sentenced to 23 consecutive life terms in a maximum security prison. As of this moment, he's currently 20 months into serving his sentence at Florence Prison in Colorado. Given his experience, I decided to consult with Agent Rodriguez on helping with a profile on the home invader being dubbed the Showtime Killer. Oh, in case you're wondering why they call him this, it's because he loves an audience. Well, the next day I caught a flight from Lincoln to Houston and made my way to the basement floor of the Texas field office. I made my way into the back office, where Special Agent Rodriguez was situated. I tentatively knocked on the door, just in case he was in the middle of a meeting or phone call. No one answered, however, so I tried to peer through his window. Well, this didn't go unnoticed, and the head of BSU, Dan Ackerman, came up behind me and tapped me on my shoulder. I turned around, slightly startled. He's not here, I'm afraid," Ackerman said, a slimy edge to his tone. Well, for context, I didn't like Ackerman, and he didn't like me. I don't think there's many that are ranked below him that liked him, to be quite honest. He was the sort to throw his weight around in a passive-aggressive sort of way, and no one could tell him he was wrong, because he never was. But he usually was. You with me? He had suppressed our profile on Robert Cassidy for a while. He was certain that the person we were looking for was a drifter, a homeless man who killed his victims to take their money and then moves on to a new state. Our profile, on the other hand, was based on historical interview tapes of Ted Bundy, another serial killer who abducted women to rape and kill them before dumping their bodies in a nearby wooded area. Bundy was respectable, and to most women, a decent-looking young man. He dressed as policemen, professors, tennis players, and often painted himself as disabled or at least injured. He painted himself as someone the public could trust, and someone that women wouldn't see as a physical threat. We believed our man was someone who did similar things, was someone who was well-groomed and likely somewhat attractive based on the age of the women. They were all young, attractive, and appealing. Not the sort of people who would risk being alone with a homeless drifter who could very well be aggressive. So when it came to the theft of the victims' money, credit cards, and the keys to their homes, well, we profiled this behavior as someone who needed the money, perhaps to disguise a lack of income. Well, we also looked at John Wayne Gacy and Dennis Rader, serial murderers who used their jobs to hide their crimes, as well as using their jobs to find potential victims. Rader in particular was also a killer who had a family, hiding his crimes from them for years. Our final profile consisted of 7 main bullet points. 1. Very high sense of self-worth. 2. Poorly or unexplained long absences away from home. 3. Attractive or well-presented white male, likely between 30 and 40. 4. A job that involves traveling the United States with seemingly varying amounts of pay. 5. Spends a lot of money on different clothes and odd items such as fancy dress outfits or disability equipment. 6. Cell phone is switched off for long periods of time during the night whilst away from home. And 7. Unwillingness to elaborate on early life or other absences. We had this profile ready to send out to the news outlets, hoping a wife or girlfriend would notice the odd behavior and phone it in. However, as mentioned, Dan Ackerman told us it was a drifter, and that was that. It was his way or the highway. Pompous asshole. 6 more women had to die before we got lucky. After Cassidy ran into trouble whilst trying to dispose of one of his victims, Julie Devereaux, he, instead of dumping her in a remote wooded area, dumped her body in a city alleyway. He was spotted leaving the scene by a pedestrian, who got a pretty decent look at him. When they described a well-groomed man with slick-back hair and with a square, well-shaven jaw, Ackerman couldn't deny our profile any longer, although it wasn't without trying. Once the profile was out there, it was just waiting until it found the right set of eyes, and on one fateful day, it did. Robert Cassidy's wife, Amy Edmonds, who saw the sketch on a breaking news bulletin, and then, upon looking into the case further, found the profile on the FBI website. She called in her suspicions, and as soon as we heard about Robert Cassidy, we knew we had our man. Yeah, so, I see, do you happen to know where he is? I asked, trying to hold back my contempt for the man. Oh, haven't you heard? We've both been asked to assist organized crime with the swarm's remaining traffic gangs. Given our expertise in the area, it's hardly surprising. So I'm afraid you'll have to find someone else to babysit you on your little assignment. His tone was as condescending as it was patronizing. He knows some agents see him as the man who cost an extra 6 women their lives due to his sheer pig-headedness. And the thing is, Agent Rodriguez was the guy who helped bring down the swarm and created the profile that caught the most vicious serial killer the USA has ever seen. He was Superman to the Bureau, so unfortunately, it was just me to take the stick from this giant asshole. Triple mass homicide a little assignment now? I asked, sarcastically, before adding, just want to make sure we have an accurate profile of the killer. Don't want anything holding back the investigation and costing more lives, do I now? I tried to suppress my smirk as Ackerman's fell into a hardened scowl. He was a little lost for words. Oh, I wish I could bottle this moment. Then, what are you skulking around in here for? Get out there and find them, he said, storming into his office. I decided to leave the building and simply give Agent Rodriguez a call on his cell phone. After a few rings, the call was picked up. Quincy, what's up? What can I do for you? Rodriguez said loudly, speaking over what sounded like a busy task force office. I just need some advice. Sounds pretty busy there. Want me to call you back? I replied. No, absolutely not. These guys can manage for a few minutes without me. We're just setting up a surveillance op on the border, hoping to identify who's trying to take over the swarm's patch. What do you need advice on? Rodriguez asked. Well, James was older than me. He came to Quantico the same time I did, except he worked for Albuquerque PD as a homicide detective for over 10 years before he arrived at the Bureau. I came straight from Oregon State University after completing my master's in criminology. Well, despite me having no practical experience in the field of violent crime, he's never treated me like he knows better than me, despite the fact he does. He's treated me like an older brother. On some days, I'd go as far as saying like a father. Let me guess. The home invasion murders. You've been asked to help create a profile for the authorities of this Showtime killer, James asked. I smiled at his perception. Yep, got it in one. Well, don't know where to begin. It's so different out in the field than what it is in the classroom. You were the brains behind Cassidy, not me. Man, I'm out of my depth, James, I said in an honest tone. James chuckled. You're too hard on yourself. You came up with your own ideas on the profile. You're a good profiler, Peter. Just gotta trust your instincts and remember your studies. I mean, I don't have the time to help you, but I don't know. His sentence trailed off in thought. No, go ahead. What are you thinking? I asked, intrigued. Well, when we did the profile for the CL cannibal, what did we do? We looked at other killers like Bundy, Gacy, and Rader. Is your guys a home invader? I'd revisit Rader and maybe look at Richard Ramirez too. Both were home invaders and sexual deviants. But there's one more avenue you could go down, and I think it could be an untapped resource. Well, I'm all ears, I said, open to his idea. I've seen the reports. Extreme sexual sadism, sodomized after death, signs of cannibalism. Maybe there's a more potent source you can look for information. What about Cassidy himself? James threw the idea on the table. "You think he'll even speak to me?" I asked, taken aback. "Well, one way to find out, I guess. Just play into his vanity and intellectual ego, and I doubt you'll go far wrong. Let me know how it goes, Quince. I gotta get back to these lot, but good luck, and I have faith in you," James said, wishing me well. I thanked him for the advice and decided to call Florence Prison and request a VO. Cassidy had been already charged and sentenced, so if he didn't want to talk to me, then he didn't have to. While I waited to hear back from the prison with Cassidy's decision, I decided to go look at one of the previous crime scenes while I was in Texas. I drove up to Austin, back to the scene of the first murder. I pulled up outside 423 Caroline Street at around 9:23 p.m. What looked like a beautiful suburban humble abode 6 months ago, well, now had the aura of a haunted house attraction. The street was dark and very quiet. Extremely quiet. A lot of cold houses on here now, and a lot of for sale signs had gone up, and a lot of bars had been installed on windows too. The bars also looked quite new. I couldn't help feel a shade depressed. I armed myself with a torch and the memo recorder on my phone. I took the keys given to me by Austin PD and slid them into the lock. The door swung open with a slight creak, letting the Nebraska moonlight radiate into the dark hallway. I entered the house and immediately felt uneasy. The empathy I had for the family was coursing through me. The terror they felt that night when a stranger was in their house with malign intentions. I made my way to the master bedroom and flicked on the light. Dry blood was splattered on the walls in a pattern consistent with a slashing motion. There was an obscenely large brown stain on the mattress. I walked over to the window and looked into the back garden. A large oak tree with sturdy branches sits around 30 meters from the master bedroom window. A great vantage point to stalk his victims. Is that what you did, huh, you sick fuck? Did you sit right there and watch Mrs. Clayton undress? Was watching simply not enough for you anymore? Couldn't you control your urges any longer? I said into the recording. I walked back into the hallway and noticed a picture was missing from the wall outside the children's room. The picture's missing from outside the children's room. Crime scene reports that there were shards of broken glass and a large indentation in the wall's foundation. Did one of the kids try to alert the parents? He rushed to catch them. Did the father and the assailant struggle for a weapon and they forced each other into this area? I said, adding another memo to my phone. I then headed into the children's room. I walked over to the window. I pressed record once again. The door was locked when the police arrived the next day. No sign of forced entry in any of the doors or windows. However, the children's window was a fire escape window, installed recently to comply with building safety regulations. The Claytons were planning on selling up and moving to Canada. It was a hot night that evening. Did the children leave the window open for fresh air? It'd be the only window that could open far enough for a grown man to fit through. All of a sudden, a sharp noise cracked the silence of the night. I startled heavily, hitting stop on the record in a panic. I got my breathing under control, drew my weapon and peered back into the hall. The front door had slammed shut in the wind. It didn't even seem that gusty, to be honest, but nevertheless I shook my head at myself in disappointment for being such a scaredy cat. I decided it was getting late. I couldn't shake the horrible dread that the family must have felt that night, and my head wasn't where it needed to be. I exited the house, locked up, and drove the keys back to the police department. Once I was sat in the departure lounge at the airport, I went through the case files of all 3 homicides and noticed a pattern. I made sure no one was within earshot and made another recording. At the Scott house, there were no signs of a burglary. No money or anything of financial value was taken. However, Marilyn Scott's sister said that there was a family photo missing from the living room. Well, the only reason she knew is because the photo was from when she bought them a professional home shoot as a Christmas present. She'd loved it, as they all looked so happy in it. So, why did the killer take it? Also, at the DeVille house, there was a nail in the wall above the fireplace. The wall looked bare as if something was missing. presumably a painting or photo. Were these his trophies? Did he potentially hate the appearance of a happy home? I pulled down the seat flap and began making up a base for my profile. Questions that needed answering and such. Well, you see, psychology in violent crimes such as dealing with an armed hostage taker and so on, well, it's important to find out who you're dealing with so you can understand what has caused this situation to occur. And thus we can then try to use that to help diffuse the situation. When it comes to profiling for a violent crime such as a homicide or rape, or even both, we flip the process. We ask ourselves what has caused this situation, why has this situation happened this way, and then that can give us a base on who we're dealing with. The main questions I needed answering were, why does he kill the entire family? Or more so, why does he make them watch the mother? Why does he take the photos? What do they mean to him? And, most importantly, how is he choosing the victims? And I knew the quicker I figured out the answers, the more lives I'd save. Part 2. It wasn't more than a week later that the prison contacted me. It was a Tuesday morning, if I remember correctly. My cell rang and the number was a Denver area code. I answered it with eagerness, yet a shade of apprehension, just in case it was a no. Special Agent Quince. How do you do? This is Warden Milner from Florence ADX. I have a visitor request here for yourself to see, Mr. Robert Maxwell Cassidy. The man said in an Ivy League type of tone, a well-educated, stern and controlling person, I assumed. Good morning, Mr. Milner. I'm very well, thank you. Yes, that's right. I know you guys have strict protocols, but I really think a behavioral science interview with Cassidy will aid in creating a, At that, I was cut off. I'm afraid I'm not overly excited about granting the VO. You see, Special Agent Quince, I have a fortress here. A fortress full of drug barons, bank robbers, terrorists, even the leader of the AB, but Robert Cassidy is probably the most dangerous of them all, believe it or not. He doesn't need to have 10 white supremacist thugs shiv you in the laundry room, or have his Al-Qaeda buddies fly a plane into your building to get his point across, he informed me, and I scoffed. I'm well aware of how dangerous he is, Mr. Milner. I've been to his crime scenes. I've seen what he does to young, vulnerable women. And as I'm sure you're aware, we have a case that needs his urgent He cut me off again. He could kill half my staff with just a ballpoint pen given the chance, Mr. Quince. In fact, he's been with us just under 2 years now, and in that time, he's been involved in a number of violent incidents with his fellow inmates. But not just the inmates. There have been other incidents, some which have cost the taxpayers of this country millions in staff compensation payouts. And someone like you coming in means I have to take him out of the hole, and I think seeing one of the men who helped put him in there, well, may somewhat agitate Mr. Cassidy. Once again I scoffed. Agitate? How would it agitate you, Mr. Milner, if a psychopath slipped through your children's window tonight, tied them up and made them watch while he raped your wife with a bedpost and castrated you alive? Well, as soon as the words left my mouth, I wanted the world to swallow me up. There was a pause before Mr. Milner simply said, I'm not married. I couldn't hold back my amused smile. Look, my point is, there's a person who's done this 3 times, and he'll do it again. Now, while Cassidy wasn't a home invader, one of the bodies we found in a burial site contained a male victim, a head teacher from a boarding school in Atlanta. The man had had his genitals removed with a bowie knife, similar MO used by our home invader in his last murder. An interview into why he did this may give us an idea of who we're looking for. I'm asking you to try and save some lives here, Mr. Milner. How can you say no to that? I asked, sincerely. There was another long pause while he mulled over my question. A quiet sigh before he simply said, Okay, tomorrow, 10 a.m. Bring ID, no firearms. Good day, Special Agent Quince. The phone then went dead. Asshole, I said to no one in particular. I was on a plane that night to Colorado. Myself and the new kid, Agent Bodkins, arrived at the Supermax facility around 9:30 a.m. I'd heard of Florence being the Alcatraz of the Rockies, but I'll be honest, it was truly daunting. A modern-day fortress, housing the real-life monsters that walk this earth. We pressed forward, through the guard station, signing in our vehicle. "Been expecting you. Lieutenant Perkins is in the visitor's center for you," the guard informed. I thanked him and parked the car in the allocated bay. As we entered the building, a well-built, military-looking officer saluted and approached us. "Special Agent Quint and Agent Barkins. I'm CO Lieutenant Perkins. I'll be escorting you both today and supervising the interview," he told me sternly. Yes, good morning, Lieutenant. I was hoping that our interview would be just the three of us." Well, my sentence wasn't even half finished before he began shaking his head in robotic disagreement. "No can do. Robert Cassidy is in the hole. He needs to be kept under 24-hour supervision and have at least 2 firearms aimed at him when he's not in his cell," he said, whilst I looked over his shoulder to another CO wearing sunglasses, rifle at the ready. "It sounds a little OTT, don't you think?" said Agent Bodkins with hints of naivety to his scoff. Even though a small part of me agreed, I knew it wouldn't come across well. I gave him a look over my shoulder, scolding him. "No, I do not," he said purposely. He took a moment in his mind before saying, "Perhaps I should show you something," he said curiously, and led us into a nearby office. Well, the office wasn't large. It didn't need to be, I guess. Just contained file cabinets, a desk, a kitchen area, and a television set. He opened a file cabinet drawer and, after sifting through the individual dividers, found what he was looking for. He pulled out a DVD, slotted it into the player, and turned on the television. "What are we watching here, Lieutenant?" I asked impatiently. "Security footage for a few months back," he replied, concentrating on rewinding the tape to a specific point. Bodkins and I decided not to ask any more questions and instead made ourselves comfortable on the edge of the desk and faced the screen. An image soon began playing. It depicted a hallway. Around roughly 4 people were mulling around in there, one of whom was Robert Cassidy. He was wearing a cleaner's uniform that indicated that he was a prisoner and not a member of staff. He was mopping a floor, back turned to the security gate, the camera pointing down at his face. "What are we watching here, Luke?" I began to ask before I was shushed and told to keep watching. After a few seconds, the image shows a guard come to the gate, unlocks it, opens it, and walks away. The 3 men in the hallway with Cassidy see this and immediately make a swift exit out of the gate. Cassidy stays where he is. Soon, 4 large men, all with short haircuts and swastika tattoos, rush into the hallway. The last man in closes the gate behind him and continues to rush Cassidy with the others. Cassidy turns to them and begins to crack his neck, as if warming up for a workout. One of the men lashes out at him, punching him to the ground, and the men are suddenly like hyenas, diving at a wounded gazelle and picking at its carcass. Kicking, stomping and punching. Well, they were really laying into him. However, after around 8 to 10 seconds, one of the men suddenly hunches over in pain and stumbles across the hall with a toothbrush sticking out of his groin. Soon Cassidy bursts through the gap left by the man. He's armed with the mop. He swings it at one of the men, breaking it around his head. With the remaining half of the mop handle left in his hands, he places it around the back of one of their necks and uses the leverage to deliver an extremely vicious headbutt. What I assume is blood flies everywhere. The remaining thug jumps on Cassidy's back, trying to apply a rear naked choke. Cassidy throws his weight forward, flipping the man over him and onto his back. Cassidy, with all his might, then drives the jagged end of the handle into the eye of the 4th man. The man twitches uncontrollably on the floor. Cassidy goes into the pockets of the unconscious man that he hit with a mop and finds another shiv. He stands up, wipes the blood from his nose and mouth, up through his hair, slicking it back, as if using it as some sort of hair gel. He then saunters over to one of the men on the floor who already has a shiv stuck in them. They let go of their wound so they can hold their hands up in a plea for mercy, but Cassidy doesn't let up. In a total frenzy, he puts at least 13 holes in this guy before the guard opens the door and a group of COs storm into the hallway and pin him to the floor. The lieutenant pauses the video and turns to see our reactions, which, to be fair, are somewhat astounded. Someone cut in line ahead of Cassidy, so he bit his ear off, then proceeded to eat his ear in front of the whole wing. Savage, right? Well, turns out the victim's cousin was an Aryan shock collar, put out a word to have Cassidy beaten to a pulp, then have his balls cut off and hung from the canteen ceiling. He ordered 4 of the toughest Neos to do it, even paid off the guard to facilitate it. He was meant to erase the footage after it happened, but seeing as Cassidy turned the tables, the alarm was raised and the guard was apprehended before it could be covered up. 2 of those men are dead. The other was in a coma for a week. Only one of them is alive and well. If having 17 stitches in your face and a metal-plated nose is classed as well, he quipped, before beginning to press fast forward for a few seconds. He was in Site A when this occurred. His safety was in breach at this point, so we decided to house him in Site B while he recovered from the attack. Well, Site B is less secure. That's where we house parolees, detox inmates, good behavior and vulnerable prisoners. He hit play. It showed what looked like a ward of a hospital before I clocked on that it was the prison infirmary. Cassidy lay in the far bed in the corner. A nurse came to apply what may have been jelly from an ultrasound before suddenly Cassidy shot up and grabbed both sides of the nurse's face and began to gore at it. He then slammed her head against his bed frame, knocking her out cold. He then climbed out of the bed, smashed the window, and pulled himself out of it. Perkins hit stop, turned to us and said, "Jenny Pratt, sweet girl, didn't deserve that. Well, she lived, but she'll never look the same again." Consolation was he didn't get far at all. He was shot with 5 rubber bullets before he got within 200 feet of the fence. After that, Warden Milner ordered him to be put in Site C, aka the Hole. The Hole was a place we built underneath Site A. It's where we put the people who don't deserve to ever see daylight again. Cassidy's been down there for 6 months now. I'm responsible for his, shall we say, well-being, Perkins said with a hint of sadism in his smile. So you can understand why we're all apprehensive about any relaxation or complacency when it comes to Cassidy's security. If we let him in that room, no cuffs and no weapons on him, he'll likely ask for a pen to sign your waiver. And when you give it, he'll kill you and your partner with it and make another break for it. Well, I scoffed at this extreme catastrophizing. We're FBI, Lieutenant. We're not idiots. The prisoner will not be given anything sharp, blunt, or heavy. He doesn't need to be unchained. You can have weapons at the ready, but outside the room. We need Cassidy to speak unobjectively and unadulterated, or for his insights to be useful in our case. Now yes, Robert Cassidy is potentially dangerous to me and Agent Bodkins while we're in that room. But we have a man who's breaking into homes, tying up kids and making them watch while their mummy is raped and their daddy is murdered. So, I don't have too much time to be worried about myself. I have lives to save, I said in a passionate voice, while Perkins mulled over my words. Milner told me to throw this out, try to put you off. But my mother lives in Omaha. She's terrified of that home invader killer. You really think Cassidy can help you get him? He asked, genuinely curious. He's a serial killer who targeted young yet stable women, beat them, raped them, tortured them, divulged in acts of post-mortem mutilation. If he tells us about why he did those things, then yes, we can hopefully use those insights to create a profile of who is doing the home invasion murders, I answered confidently. Perkins stood up, turned off the TV, and began to open the office door. Then, let's go. Part 3. We made our way over to Site A on a glorified golf cart. Site A was daunting to look at, even more so seeing the increase in guard numbers, more barbed wire, more lights, more towers. Once inside, the cells seemed to look more like vaults than they did rooms. 8x9 safety deposit boxes containing the most dangerous men on Earth. Perkins led us over to one of the cell doors that looked different to the rest. He entered a code, covering the pad with his body like he was entering his banking pin. Once he entered the code, 2 card readers lit up from red to green on either side of the door. Perkins signaled to one of the other guards to come down. Once the guard got to the door, they both took out a key card on red lanyards from under their vests. They both aimed their cards into the slots, eyed each other as they counted down from 3, then simultaneously swiped the cards downward. The door beeped. Some mechanics did their thing, and the pneumatics pushed the door open to reveal a modified lift shaft. Perkins pressed the intercom and spoke to a voice. "Prepare prisoner H45635 for federal post-sentence interview. Chains remain on. Interview room 3, the one with the glass divider. I'm in the elevator with Agents Quince and Bodkins right now, requesting descent." He said this as I looked into the camera in the top corner of the elevator. The voice responded. "Descension approved. Please hold the rail." The cell began to move downward in a diagonal fashion. Once at the bottom, 2 guards repeated the procedure of opening the door and let myself, Bodkins, and Perkins out into an all-white hallway, lit up with large ceiling lights. The hallway was several feet wide with a built-in divider that designated a one-way system. On the right-hand side of the hallway, there were around 6 rooms. 4 were for interviews. 1 was the medical room. 1 was an admin cell or a search room. The remaining room was likely a staff room, if I had to take a guess. Opposite to the 6 rooms on the other side were 6 cells. These cells looked like bank vaults for the world's most prized possessions. Nothing was getting out of them. At the end of the corridor was a cylinder guard station where a guard sat facing us through a barred window. Behind him was a large space. The whole had an eye look to it from a bird's eye view. In the guard station I could see CCTV screens, intercoms, automatic rifles and pistols. Inside the station were around 6 guards. "Gentlemen, welcome to the hole," Perkins said theatrically. "How many people you got down here?" Bodkins asked, peering around at the cells. "Just 3. The 93 Trade Center bomber, Tyler Bingham, leader of the AB, and Robert Cassidy, the cross-line cannibal. Now, normally they'd be upstairs. However, we bring them down here if we believe they're a detrimental risk to the staff, the public, or the prisoners or themselves," Perkins informed us, as we made our way past the cells and towards the guard station. "Surely the rest of them deserve to be down here too," Bodkins suggested. Perkins smirked. "I couldn't agree more, kid, but we save this place for those who pose a current, ongoing, known, and credible threat to the people around them. The bomb was found using covert communications that were linked with a planned attack in Kenya. Bingham had 2 prisoners in Stockton shivved, and Cassidy was going to be the 3rd. Well, down here, there's no chance of having any communication with the person in the next cell, let alone the outside world." "Okay, if you want to make your way in here," he said, opening up interview room 3. Inside there were 2 chairs facing a desk unit built into a solid steel wall. The room's interior was mirrored on the other side of a 2x1.5 window. Bulletproof glass, I assumed. The only difference was there was a singular chair on the other side. "Take a seat. I'll go get him," Perkins informed us. We obliged and took a seat as advised and began to set up a mini tripod area. We then sat there for around 25 minutes, spreading our time equally between twiddling our thumbs and sighing. Before, finally, on the other side of the glass, in the left-hand corner, a door buzzed and began to slowly open. Perkins entered the room, holding what can only be described as a chain leash. As he pulled the chain into the room, what was attached to the chain also entered the room. A black hooded man in a contrasting white straitjacket came waddling into the room, wrapped up in a mountain of steel and shackles. Perkins took the end of the chain he was holding, almost like taking a dog for a walk, and fastened it to an anchor point on the desk. He guided the man to the chair and forcibly drove him into the seat by pressing down on his shoulders. He removed the hood, revealing Robert Cassidy's pale, unkempt face. Well, a harrowing lack of sunlight and shaving cream will do that to you, I guess. I noticed Cassidy had a fading black eye and a split lip. The incident with the Aryan attack was over 8 months ago. These were from something else. Can we not remove some of these chains? I feel like I'm interviewing Houdini, I asked. Perkins shook his head and scowled. It's this, or I have 2 guards in here with loaded weapons pointing at him for the course of the interview. I know you may think what we do here is overkill, Agent Quince, but you didn't see my Perkins caught himself. That nurse's face. We take no chances here, he informed us. He made his way out of the room, and before he shut the door behind him, he said, "There's a red button under the desk on both sides. If either party want to end the interview, press that." He then shut the door, and we heard the mechanisms click and the pneumatics pump away. "Good morning, agents," Cassidy said with a superficial politeness. "Lovely weather we're having, aren't we?" he quipped sarcastically. Never lasts, though, does it?" Bodkins chuckled, as both Cassidy and I eyed him in disbelief, wondering how the joke went over his head. "Do you mind if we videotape this, Robert?" "Can I call you Robert?" I asked. "I live in a 6x8 vault, 150 feet underground, hugged by canvas and chains. I don't really think I have much of a say in anything. You videotape and call me what you please, Agent. Makes no odds to me," he said nonchalantly. "Okay, so, we're conducting this post-sentence interview as part of our behavior science survey with men such as yourself, who've been convicted of multiple cases of extremely violent crime. Anything you tell us in this interview cannot be used against you in any future charges or your applications for payroll." Well, I read out from the legal contract. Cassidy couldn't hold back his laughter. "Does it look like a place that offers parole?" he chuckled. "Look, I was convicted of 22 murders of 22 young and privileged white women, Agent. They'll never let me out of here while I take a breath. So there's really no need for all this fine print nonsense. This is the only time in 8 months that I've seen another room, other than the one I sleep, shit, and eat in, of course. So please, get to the fucking point." "Well, okay. There are some things we need help with. Things that only someone like yourself may know." I eased into him, and Cassidy grinned like a Cheshire cat and began to chuckle as he looked at the floor. He raised his head and flashed his pearly yellows at us. You've got some other naughty boy out there right now, haven't you? What's wrong, Agent? Is he not making it easy for you? So you want to create one of those psycho mumbo-jumbo profiles for him? Waste of time," he dismissed. Bodkins suddenly grew a backbone from nowhere. "Well, it worked with you, didn't it?" Cassidy's smile turned to a blank expression bordering on menace. "I was only caught because I was betrayed, not because some backroom boy made some assumptions about my childhood. People like me can't be summed up in a few bullet points, Agent Bodwin." "Bodkins," he snapped, confirming his name. "Sorry," Cassidy said, clearly not sorry at all. And not to mention that she totally outsmarted you. The double wiretrap trick was all her idea, you know. Our only input was advising her that you're just like every other violent sociopath out there, and you'd love to brag about the things you've done. Make you feel special, even when you're not. Oh, Bodkins was really going in on him. Cassidy's glare was horrifying. I decided to intervene. "Look, Robert, what I think Bodkins is trying to say here is that whatever your opinions are on the work we do in behavioral science, we at the Bureau really think that a background of your life and your emotional state before, during, and after your crimes would really give us some aid in our investigation into these home invasion murders. As we have over 30 years of research proving that there are links between people who murder compulsively." I felt my diplomatic approach had soothed the situation, but his face still looked unhappy. I needed to repair the relationship. Where did you get that? I asked, nodding my head toward the injuries on Cassidy's face. Well, he finally grinned. Fell, totally by accident, in my 6x8 cell, all by myself, he scoffed. Well, at least that's what Perkins' report said, Cassidy added facetiously. Are you saying that's not what happened? I asked. Cassidy smiled at the naivety of my question and rolled his pupils back into the top corners of his eyes, guiding my vision to the CCTV camera in the corner of the ceiling. Oh, absolutely not, Agent. Whatever Lieutenant Perkins said happened is the God's honest truth, he said dramatically. Look, I could potentially speak with the warden, maybe even the Department of Justice, get them to agree a transfer, trial period of course. You'll have to stay in Florence as part of your sentence, but maybe I could get you back to Side A. Maximum security would still apply, but you'd at least be able to see daylight every day. Daily exercise, 3 meals a day, maybe even a TV. Cassidy's laughter cut me short. Well, yeah, I've been missing Ellen, to be honest, Cassidy joked. I could see that you're away from Lieutenant Perkins, and maybe then there'll be no more falls, I added. Cassidy's humid expression faded, and he eyed me seriously. You can really make that happen? His question put every inch of me on edge. His eyes bored into my central nervous system, searching for any hint of deceit. I tried to hold my nerve. There's no way I'd be able to pull any of those strings. Cassidy was one of the top 10 most wanted. Yes, if the insights you divulge help us create a comprehensive psychological profile of the Showtime killer, and that profile leads to his arrest, then maybe the DOJ... Showtime. Sounds like an interesting name. Why do they call him that? Cassidy asked, intrigued. Well, it's pretty dark, but... Aren't they all? Cassidy asked with a smile. Well, they call him Showtime because he likes to perform for an audience. Wow, he sounds incredible. All the best ones are. I imagine he'll keep you both busy chasing your little tails around. So, of course, you can understand my hesitance to enter into an agreement with so many ifs, buts, and maybes. Oh, I could pour my heart out, and I'd still be down here for years while you two idiots figured out what to do with it. Cassidy sat back, letting his insults sink in. Well, however, should you commit any violent acts against another prisoner, nurse, guard, or yourself, should you try and escape, then any offer or deal goes away, and you come straight back here. Or you can just not speak to us, go back to your vault and wait for your next fall. We sat back in our chairs now and folded our arms, waiting for his response. Cassidy mulled it over. Okay. Well then, what would you like to know? He relaxed back into his chair, arms folded, not that he had much choice in that matter though. I opened up a file I had with me and held it against the glass, so that Cassidy could read it. The file showed the entire crime scene photo of the DeVille family murder. Cassidy eyed it intensely. I swear I saw a glint in his eye. Who's this then? Cassidy asked, cocking his head at the photo. Claire DeVille. She's the third victim, I informed. Cassidy went from scanning the document to his vision snapping towards me once again, his mouth slightly ajar, his brows raised. Were the others like this? Cassidy asked, his sick interest piqued. I nodded. This was the only murder where the victim was found with a bedpost forced into her anus. The husband also had his genitals removed. Both these actions occurred post-mortem. Well, she's technically the 10th victim. 13 altogether because he kills the rest of the family too. Well, after he makes them watch first. The females are the targets. The rest are just a means to an end, Cassidy said bluntly. Can you explain what you mean? Agent Bodkins asked, jotting down the odd keyword on his notepad. He wanted to humiliate them, I thought out loud. Cassidy smiled at me. Very good, Agent Quince. Almost, but not quite. No, he wanted to dehumanize her. He wanted her to feel helpless, all her loved ones watching. The desire to rescue her etched all over their faces, but they were unable to help her, Cassidy lectured. Why, though? What makes you say that? Is that the goal with your victims? Bodkins asked. Cassidy gave him a stern look. Are you here for my help, or are you here to pick apart what I did? Just trust what I say, Cassidy snapped. Well, I intervened and rephrased Bodkins' question. I think what Agent Bodkins is asking is, can you give us some sort of theory behind your hypothesis? Cassidy grinned as I jumped through one of his hoops. Well, maybe this person that you're looking for. Maybe he grew up in a household that's his daddy or his stepdaddy who wasn't so nice to him. Maybe he expected his mom to rescue him, or stand up for him at least. But instead she just stood there and watched, I thought out loud once again. Cassidy smiled and gave me a round of applause. Now you're getting it, he said approvingly. Is that why you killed these women? Did your daddy beat you while your mommy was too busy with her career? Is that why you targeted successful and distinguished women? Well, Bodkins' question was full of malice. Cassidy looked at him, puzzled by his hostility. Well, so was I, quite frankly. Then it suddenly clicked in Cassidy's mind, and he flashed a sinister smile at Bodkins. Now it makes sense. What's wrong, Agent Bogdan? Did I kill someone you knew? Cassidy probed. Bodkins looked at the floor, trying to hide his contempt. He shook his head and muttered the word, Bodkins. Oh, I did, didn't I? Which one was it? Was it the one I sodomized with her own bicycle seat? Or was it the one whose head I nearly squeezed off with barbed wire? Cassidy probed, and I saw something in Bodkins snap. You know what? I just think it's bullshit. All this blaming your twisted actions on some traumatic event. You're not special, you're just average. You're the same as all the others. You think you're a pioneer, but really, you're just fucking textbook. Okay, I think we just need to take... I tried to calm the issue, but it was too late. Cassidy rose from his feet in anger. His pupils were dilated, and they were laser-focused on Agent Bodkins. I really don't think you'd have the gusto to speak those words to me if we weren't separated by this wall. And, Agent, believe me, should the day ever come where you and me are on the same side of the wall, I'll make you regret those words. This interview is over, Cassidy snapped, forcing his knee into the red button under his desk. The alarm sounded, and the guards burst into his side of the room and retrieved him back to his cell. I looked at Bodkins with bafflement and a shed of anger. He looked away in his embarrassment at not being able to control his emotions. I shook my head and pulled myself together, and we packed up and left the prison. We didn't say a word to each other whilst we were in the walls of Florence. But the minute my car door closed, sealing us inside, I lost my head. What the fuck was that? I screamed, my head falling into my hands after. Sorry, Quince. I just... You just what? Cost us our best source of psychological insight into the man who slaughtered 13 people in 6 months? Well, my question was raged and rhetorical. Bodkins aimed his gaze at the floor. I grabbed the wheel and extended my arms, driving my back against the chair. Tensing my body for a few seconds, then letting the tension flow out of me while I relaxed. Bodkin sensed the ease in my demeanor and used this opportunity to explain himself. Cassidy's fifth victim, Kim Bailey, Bodkin said bluntly. I scanned my brain hard. Kim Bailey was a successful 25-year-old college graduate. She was ready to study law at Harvard. Well, she'd recently moved to the area and was out at a student bar when she met Robert Cassidy. Her body was found a couple of days after her disappearance in Coulter Park Reservation. She'd had a knife taken to her reproductive organs, and this wasn't done post-mortem. Well, this was horrifying enough, but when I realized that she was originally from Iowa, Bodkin's hometown, I cringed. What was she to you? I asked softly, facing forward, mainly to avoid looking at Bodkins, as I could hear his somber mood bordering into sobs. She was in my class during my senior year. We were kind of a thing, he confessed. A thing? I probed. We were together for 4 years, and she was my first. First what? Oh, my God. Are you fucking kidding me? I snapped. I checked my anger, though, and considered his grief. I sighed out my anger. What I mean to say is, do you not think that this is something you should have told me before you went in there? I asked, diplomatically. Bodkins pinched the bridge of his nose, catching the tears on his fingertips. I gave him a few seconds to give his answer. I just wanted to see him. Meet this so-called criminal mastermind, the guy who was on TV representing himself at the trial, taking apart the witnesses on the stand. So suave, so intelligent, so charismatic. I heard all about those young female groupies who were outside the court, forming some kind of sick fan club. I didn't know what to expect, but he seemed too... He couldn't think of the word. Normal, I ventured. I don't know if that's the word, but it'll do, Bodkin settled. Serial murderers rarely look like the monsters we imagine them to be. I just wanted to see you took my high school sweetheart. I don't know what I really expected, but just to hear him blame the whole thing on his upbringing, it's just so... Textbook, I quoted. Bodkins perked up and nodded. Look, I understand your grief and your reaction, but I think it's best you don't take part in these interviews. If we have another interview, that is, I advised. Yeah, me too, Bodkins accepted. You can help to create the profile and relay to the locals, but as far as collecting the data, I really don't think you should ever meet Robert Cassidy again. Agreed. Okay, so now I just need a replacement. I need someone who's smart, objective, understands the criminal mind, and has experience in dealing with psychopaths. I began to think hard. Bodkins perked up and snapped his fingers. Oh, I have just the person, he exclaimed. I looked at him curiously. He began to press buttons on the GPS. I turned my curiosity to the small screen on the dashboard. He pressed the Calculate Route button, and soon the machine was directing us towards the University of Denver. So yeah, back to the Robert Cassidy universe, and as good as ever, if you ask me. Delighted to be back doing this one. That was a brilliant first episode. And as I've kind of hinted at, I'm going to be doing this again tomorrow night and on Thursday to make one epic, big, long story. Sound good to you? I hope so, because it's happening. Yeah, so we're back, and that was parts 1, 2, and 3. Lots more to come, so I hope you're going to join me again tomorrow night and on Wednesday for the full-length version of this story. So you will go on. Yes, you will? Alright, awesome. Well then, my dear friends, I guess I will see you again tomorrow night and on Thursday, and of course I'll have something for you on Friday as well. Until the next time, my dear friends, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye.